Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked, going through all the week's sports news with me, Rob Harris from Sky News, and Martyn Ziegler from The Times, and from Australia, Tariq Panja from the New York Times. It's all happening down there in Sydney.
G'day. Nice to be with you again, guys.
How's it going there, Tariq? Is it warm? I mean, it's winter time, obviously, in Australia. What's the temperatures?
I got lulled into a false sense of security, I'd say, in the early days. I thought, this is not winter, this is lovely. And then took a turn. Emergency jacket was purchased. First night of the games, it was Australia versus Ireland on the opening night, at least in Australia. And it was chilly. If anyone remembers the South Africa World Cup in 2010, it was similar. So anyway, football's played all year round. Zip up.
Perhaps it's a good job the tournament isn't being hosted in Southern Europe. Imagine if it were Italy or Greece at the moment, we'd be sort of talking about the 40s. It'd be unplayable.
Yeah, seeing that from here, yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, Thomas Back, the IOC president this week, I think we'll come on to that perhaps later, but he referenced the climate change and looking at the scheduling of major events due to this extreme heat waves.
Quite often it's been talked about in terms of, say, the Winter Olympics and it not being cold enough in some of the potential hosts, but now attention really shifting to the summer hosts as well.
Yeah, well, I saw, we might talk about this as well, I saw UEFA announce this week that Germany want the teams competing at Euro 2024 to travel by train or coach and not on planes to reduce some of that carbon footprint.
Well, quite possible. Don't think that would have been quite feasible for you to get to Sydney, although some do, don't they? I think Trans-Siberian Railway, then all the way down through Asia.
Yeah, the 7-month-long World Cup to get around like that and to do the games. I mean, I've not been here before, but really the distances are enormous, aren't they? Just looking at the flight times from, say, Sydney to Perth in the west, it's like, I think it's like London to Moscow, maybe even further than that.
Yeah, and we've still got to get into, in this episode, the Commonwealth Games and why they no longer want that in the Australian state of Victoria. But it is the Women's World Cup we begin. So how has it felt there? Obviously, the actual opening game began. It's the backdrop with the shooting in Auckland, in which 2 people were killed by a gunman who also died. And then we had the games continue as normal. And we've also been hearing from Gianni Infantino for the first time in some time out in Auckland too.
The shooting was obviously really shocking, and that was about 8 a.m. on the day of the game, the opening game in Auckland, and very close to where the Norwegian team who were playing that evening was staying. Most of them had no idea that had happened. Some of them were still sleeping, and the rest were told by security that they should obviously remain in the hotel. But Lisa Klaveness, who's been on the pod, actually, the Norwegian president, was staying a little bit further away with her family and was walking to, I think she was walking to the gym or something at the time, and was caught up in some of that and heard, I think she heard some of the shots ring out. So yeah, brings it home a little bit, doesn't it?
Just obviously, if people haven't followed it, it wasn't a terrorist incident, but nevertheless pretty shocking for those taking part.
And obviously the US staying nearby, it's something they're grimly used to in the US, but not expecting to see it happen in New Zealand.
No. And then obviously for the games, that FIFA and the local organisers were quick to point out that everything was under control. There was a minute's silence held for the victims that you referenced there, Rob, before both of those opening games as well. And then obviously the tournament kicked off. But you said, you're right, there was a press conference before that with Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, who hasn't been visiting this region as often as perhaps he'd been in Qatar for the Qatar World Cup, where he moved over there. And there was a couple of curious things with that press conference. It was held in Auckland the day before the opening game, and he was joined by the FIFA Secretary General, Fatma Samura. And, you know, cast your mind back to the Men's World Cup in Qatar and the pre-tournament press conference. The Secretary General wasn't a visible figure there at all. She is here, and I'm trying to understand why that would be the case. And that that press conference, Rob, Martyn, in Qatar, that was quite something, wasn't it? Where he had the hour-long monologue.
And he alluded to it at the start of his press conference in Auckland.
For those of you who are waiting to hear how I feel today, today I feel tired because I just landed, but I feel very happy.
Well, he didn't say he was feeling anything controversial in that press conference, unlike in Qatar, but as so often when you get the chance to unpick some of the FIFA announcements with Gianni Infantino, they do unravel a bit. So last month, the grand announcement from FIFA, secured under pressure by FIFPro, was guaranteed pay a play for the first time. So each player would earn an income, $30,000 for exiting in the group stage, which is double the average salary for a player globally, according to FIFA's last data. And for the champions, they'd bank $270,000 each. But this money won't be paid by FIFA directly to players, perhaps too much of a challenge doing so. It's going to go to the federations. But Gianni Infantino obviously hasn't got any guarantees that the federations will definitely commit to giving that money to the players.
We are an association of associations, so whatever payments we do through the associations, and then the associations will, of course, make the relevant payments to their own players. But we are in touch with all the associations. There are also different situations in different parts of the world with whatever taxations, residence, and so on and so forth, which require special agreements. There are agreements for some associations with their players from before, of course. For others, it's relatively new territory. So I think we have been taking some groundbreaking moves here and decisions, and it's by far not yet the end of the story. We are looking to work together with the associations and the players to have a smooth World Cup in this respect as well, and then as of the 21st of August, we will start to focus on the future as well, on this matter as well.
As far as the circular, Martyn, wasn't that guaranteed amount of money?
It was stipulated by FIFA, but I suppose the question is, what if the federations refuse to hand it over? I mean, I think they'd be in a bit of a sticky situation and fairly indefensible if they didn't do that. But we have seen it before, where federations have not handed over the money they've been promised. I mean, do you remember Ghana in the 2014 World Cup? I mean, the players were going on strike at one point, and I think they'd ship a case full of cash to the team hotel in order to get them to play.
It was a private jet that travelled to Brasilia, and then the money was then loaded onto a bus, and that the Brazilian TV, I think, had aerial footage with a helicopter following the cash to the Ghana team hotel in the middle of the tournament. And then there was the kind of strange sight of, I think, one of the players dancing on his bed surrounded in cash. Those are scenes that I guess FIFA and tournament organizer wouldn't want to see repeated here in Australia and New Zealand.
But you could see a situation where an FA ends up saying, look, it cost us more to prepare. All the equipment, all the staff. This is why we've had to keep it ourselves. And then what did they do?
Well, the point of the money, though, the point of it going through the FA, like from a practical point of view, it kind of works. There's a funnel from FIFA to the FA to the players, because that's different tax regimes, different ways of working. You need to go through these federations. That doesn't mean the federation gets to pocket that money, though. And that is what the fear is. Because Gianni Infantino, in the language he used, made it seem like it was less of a guarantee than it appeared on paper. But maybe he just used language that suggested that, and he just misspoke to give him, to be devil's advocate here.
The issue of the national federations losing money from taking part in the World Cup is perhaps at the heart of it, because we've been talking about this sort of pay dispute involving the England team. And so my understanding is that the Football Association will end up out of pocket from the World Cup, because they're financing a base camp support staff. They're paying £10,000 for each player for friends and family travel. So I suppose that you have to. How do you solve the conundrum about the players want more money than the guaranteed FIFA basic? 'Cause their argument is that the FA could get a commercial uplift if they were to win the World Cup. So I also hear that there is a bonus will be paid by one of the FA's commercial partners if they do very well in the competition. I think that's at least four figures. So I think it's a tricky one for the national associations like the FA to negotiate.
And as we mentioned previously, there are the development programs, the youth teams to fund, which help to produce the next generation of players, give them the chance to go and win the youth tournaments. We've seen England's men win the Euro under-21s in recent weeks as well. Gianni Infantino saying that he expects this tournament to generate $500 million and it will break even.
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because you've got the TV deal situation. We're yet to get the official line from FIFA as to whether any of that pressure Gianni Infantino put on broadcasters has resulted in significant uplift there. On the eve of the tournament, in fact, the day of the first games, they said they had completed television deals in the last ones in Japan and China and a couple of, I think, Central Asian countries, and also announced that the sponsorship had sold out to the inventory. But we didn't know what that actually means because we didn't know how many sponsors sponsorships were available publicly. They've all been very bullish, haven't they?
I think you can come up with any figure you want and then justify it. You can use the general economic benefits. I mean, if you look at the London Olympic Games in 2012, I mean, depending on which particular financial analysis you read, either it cost £12 million or it delivered a 12 billion, I should say, or it delivered a sort of £20 billion financial boost to the economy. It's sort of you can claim things in different ways.
Yeah, and we have continued to see focus on how committed FIFA is to the Women's World Cup, women's football. We do begin this tournament still with no plans for a Women's Club World Cup, despite FIFA announcing effectively two new Men's Club World Cups in that time. Gianni Infantino seen far more at men's football than women's football, maybe reflective actually of the media industry itself too. So it's quite clear that for Infantino, he hasn't been as focused on the women's game, has he?
No. Just from here, just on the ground, in terms of the women's game, we have to kind of it's in that growth phase as well, isn't it? It's professionalizing. A lot of these questions are coming up, and they're good questions because this is kind of a new. This is on a growth trajectory, and we don't know where it will go. I must say, from being at the game, the Australia game yesterday, the thing that struck me, and it was really nice. Maybe it's Australia, maybe just in Australia. Let's hope it's elsewhere as well. The number of girls and families that were attending the game, 75,000, the stadium Australia. It was supposed to be in the smaller stadium. It was the Australian Football Federation that pushed to have it in the bigger stadium so they could sell it out, and they did, more or less. And just a number of young girls who can see through events like this that there is potential to be a world-class football player as a profession. Now, if you go back 4 years, even 8 years, or maybe even 4 years, that wasn't very clear. So these kind of events, they show what is possible. But I just think we're in that growth phase right now, and there's going to be bumps ahead, isn't there?
Yeah, and for the fan base, it's an interesting challenge too. Obviously, we are three men discussing the Women's World Cup and the fan base, and you do get more families, more young girls who feel it's perhaps more accessible than some of the toxicity of a men's tournament, men's games, where there can be more drink. But at the same time, you don't want to just isolate the Women's World Cup as being for young girls, young families. You actually want to make it for all. So actually, you've got the whole broad range of fans as well, going, and that's pumping money into the game too.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying earlier, I think, Rob. So this money, that whether it's prize money or development, whatever you call it, it needs to filter down into grassroots to create more female football players. Now, I must say it was quite interesting and to watch. And New Zealand finally breaking its duck, scoring its first goal, winning its first match of the World Cup is a great start. Australia, the big
The
shock
fact the
of
men had never done it, there'd been at
right.
2 World Cups, the men, and in fact, memorably in 2010, they did leave unbeaten because they drew all 3 group stage games. This is the 6th Women's World Cup they've been to, waiting for the win. So it really is quite a moment. And Norway, at least in recent years, has been considered amongst the dark horses, potential, contenders
they
to
have.
reach the latter stages. Although
Yeah.
we've seen the last couple of tournaments, they have actually, haven't provided that same threat.
No, but the point is that this will develop and grow because for this game to really prosper, the quality has to improve, and I think even those who follow it regularly, even people who want to cheerlead along with it, the critical eye on the game is on that growth path, and the quality will need to improve to keep the audience, and that will only come through investment in grassroots and more girls playing more competition for places in teams, whether it's club teams or national teams, and that's clear, I think.
Something also noticeable at this World Cup, some transparency from referees' decisions, with FIFA playing out the referee announcing how a VAR decision is decided. And did make me wonder, watching that first game, New Zealand, Norway, whether or not referees would start to perhaps adopt their particular way of saying things like penalty to get noticed a bit.
Mike Dean style, you mean, announcing the VAR decisions.
Yeah. As an aside this week, by the way, the International Football Association Board announced a bit of a rebrand, obviously known as the Laws of the Game for, 150 years. They have launched a more accessible football rules website. There are many sticklers, traditionalists within the football game who insist they are laws and not rules, but rules is now there.
Yeah, Mike Collett, the football editor for Reuters for many years until he retired a couple of years ago, he'll be absolutely furious about that. It was always laws and not rules for him. Yeah. But just before we finish on the Women's World Cup, just to say I was very pleased that New Zealand won because Cilla Duncan, former FIFA press office, was a former New Zealand women's international, and I played against her in 2014 in the FIFA v Press match, and she ran rings around me. So yeah, well done, Cilla.
Yeah, what a moment. Before we do move on, we've been talking about the money coming into the game. We've been talking about the sponsors. Now, Nike aren't one of the official sponsors, but certainly they are one of the companies that sort of talk up how much they're doing for the women's game. Very glossy adverts showing how they are so committed. But again, as so often, even though they've produced this advert where they talk about creating bigger change and expanding the sport for the next generation and giving athletes the power to change the world. This is certainly how they announced their Women's World Cup advert. Some of the reality highlights the challenges still. The England goalkeeper, Mary Earps, pointing out you can't buy a replica England goalkeeper's jersey, which is made by Nike.
You can understand the Nike thing. It's not a kind of commercial, not going to be a commercial success, and it would be quite costly to produce a goalkeeper's shirt, which is going to have minimal sales. You would expect. On the other hand, I think if you're going to try and cash in on by promoting yourself as the champion of women's football, then you probably have to take that hit. And I quite understand why Mary Earps is a bit annoyed about it.
How many goalkeeper shirts do they sell broadly? I mean, when you go to football matches, I didn't know. Do they sell the goalkeeper jerseys of most teams? I haven't followed the mark. Obviously, when you go into a sports store in the world, you'll see home and away shirts, women's shirts. You'll see all sorts of different shirts. Rob, you're a goalkeeper, if I remember right. So, how easy was it for you to buy these goalkeeper jerseys?
I did have replica ones as a youngster when I was playing in goal, so they were available even back then.
Yeah, they are. You can get them, David De Gea shirts or whatever your club is, or so yeah, they are available generally. But I think the only one you can get for England is basically the men's one.
it's all showing how the players are willing to use their platform, even if it means taking on a team sponsor, and also in dispute with their bosses at the FA as the tournament approaches. And we've been hearing on that from the England defender Lucy Bronze about how they feel as a group as they try to still push the game forward while at a World Cup.
I think the players are feeling very empowered. I think it's the first time as a player group we've actually ever sent a message out ourselves. It's a very empowered player group, us trying to drive change in women's football, whatever that looks like. I think we're trying to set a trail for what women's football should look like in our country.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a feature of women's football for the last, well, for as long as we've had women's football having prominence, on TV and in the press. We saw, obviously, the last World Cup, Megan Rapinoe famously using the platform of the World Cup to have a tussle with, I think it was the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, throughout that event. And we've seen women talking about issues, particularly when it comes to issues that are very relevant to them, like the LGBTQ issues and other social causes. And here in Australia and New Zealand, there was also the First Nations rights and to promote and celebrate First Nations. And we had flags of those in both stadiums. That'll be the first time that's happened.
Talking about players and athletes using their voices, will that happen with the Commonwealth Games? Because while we've got the focus on Australia, came the announcement from the Australian state of Victoria that they no longer want the Commonwealth Games in 2026. They're too expensive. So we're getting a sense from athletes they're disappointed. It is a platform for some that don't get the Olympic stage. But this really is a sign that no longer can areas just fork out money and stage these events at a loss, although there is quite a bit of scrutiny over how they reached this decision in Victoria.
I think the whole future of the Commonwealth Games is now in some jeopardy, because we've had situations before, like for the 2022 Commonwealth Games, it was supposed to be in Durban. That fell through, so Birmingham stepped in, but the British government made it sort of fairly clear at the time there was going to be no more bailouts. And now we've got the same situation with Victoria. I mean, it does look like the Gold Coast might step in, but are we really looking at a future of this event, which is very, very costly to stage? Is it just going to go between Australia, Britain, Canada? I mean, if it's meant to be something for the Commonwealth 56 countries, I think it's got to be a bit more relevant than that.
Well, they have to maybe change the format of how you host these things. Maybe do something more dynamic, multi-country, multi-city, just to reduce the cost and to increase the appeal. I mean, in the modern world where all these big events are competing and smashing into each other, the Commonwealth Games just, is it worth it, in terms of the cost and the outlay for anyone who hosts it? Or is this now a case to have a permanent host?
Amongst the issues are not just the venues, but accommodating all the athletes. So you do need to build athlete villages, although some would say there are many cities in the world that actually need to do more to build housing anyway, which a Commonwealth Games can provide. Although you see with the Olympics, a lot of it got sold actually to Qatar, didn't it, in the Stratford area. But as we sort of look at the decision in Victoria, they were talking about costs spiraling to 7 billion Australian dollars. So that's just under, say, 4 billion pounds for just under 5 billion US dollars. And it couldn't be justified. But there's quite a bit of anger because the Commonwealth Games Federation saying they were only informed, a few hours before this decision themselves. So felt in some ways blindsided by this.
Yeah, so it looks like there was a political aspect to this, and then the opposition politicians they've been sort of jumping up and down about it as well, saying that they've overstated the costs. The current Premier of Victoria, so, and obviously the Commonwealth Games Federation are furious because it came as a shock to them as it did to everybody else. But I think they need. I mean, you're quite right to mention the number of athletes and the cost of accommodating them, and that's why I think it just needs to be massively slimmed down. So it's a pinnacle for things like netball. That's not an Olympic sport. Squash isn't an Olympic sport. perhaps do you really need to have cricket? Do you really need to have rugby? Or these team sports, because for them it's not the pinnacle. So I think time's come to really address the situation, massively reduce the number of athletes, cut some of the sports which are sort of fairly unimportant, and also accept that as we talked about LGBT plus issues. I mean, 36 or 34 of the 56 countries in the Commonwealth still outlaw homosexuality, so that's a big issue as well. And that's something that the Commonwealth Games Federation is going to be confronted with in the future.
Absolutely. Where is it an anachronism? Where does it fit in the global sporting calendar? The one thing I noticed, there was a piece in the Guardian, I think, and it referenced this somewhere in the middle of this story, and it said these cities, in this case, the Australian city here, has said it hired consultancy, one of the big four consultancy firms, to budget this stuff out, and it's 4 times above whatever this consultancy group have come up with. And these companies, what is it? Just like finger in the air, put a sticker number down, and then put your name onto it. I'm not going to name any of these big four. You can Google them, but it's not the first time where these consultants who are seen as geniuses have royally screwed up again. It's time to kind of reimagine how these sums are done and how these bids are produced as well, isn't it?
Have you had enough of experts?
Well,
as one Tory MP once said in the UK.
Well, no, perhaps we need experts and fewer generalists, because it seems like you outsource this to people who aren't experts in this case. They're jack of all trades, and you sell your reputation as an international company that knows about everything, and sometimes it looks like you don't.
Yeah, and maybe this does need a radical overhaul, as we talked about. Maybe spreading a Commonwealth Games across multiple countries even. So I thought this previously when they were grappling over Paris and LA for the 2024-28 games, the 24-hour Olympics. Perhaps actually if the cycling venue is best in the UK, swimming in Australia, you turn it into a 24-hour sort of TV event type thing. You do lose that big event feel where you get an opening ceremony with all the athletes parading in, but maybe it's more accessible for television in that way.
24-hour party people. I love that idea when you mentioned it at the time, Rob. And if the Commonwealth Games Federation people are listening, Rob is available on a retainer. So
less than the consultants.
Less than the consultants.
Overall, this is actually about more than sport, isn't it? It's about the future of the Commonwealth, which we have many listeners from non-Commonwealth countries. This sort of relic, some might say, of the British Empire, a modern extension of the legacy of the British Empire that unites disparate countries, but they are part of this entity led now by King Charles, having inherited the leadership of the Commonwealth from the Queen. But it is a disparate group, some nations with Charles as head of state, some as independent nations, some countries that have signed up to the Commonwealth. So it's beyond sport. It's about questions of the relevance of the Commonwealth in the modern world when you've got other things like regional bodies like the EU, NATO, even for defence, isn't it?
And a lot of countries do think that the Commonwealth Games has to address issues of the empire and the damage that was caused and the sort of exploitation of their countries. So I think there's so many challenges now for this. I mean, who is going to host the Commonwealth Games after this? I think there's talk about Canada stepping in to do it, but I think I'm glad I'm not running the Commonwealth Games Federation, because I think it's going to be very tricky times ahead.
Well, if you're in need of an injection of cash into sport at the moment and you're sort of willing to accept it, there's always the option of Saudi Arabia. So perhaps a bid from NEOM to host the Commonwealth Games in future.
Well, you say that. I mean, Saudi Arabia has had some sort of times. Britain was involved in running the countries around before the First World War, wasn't it? So it's not the most ridiculous idea ever, Rob. And hosting everything else or bidding for everything else and signing up all the footballers. So yeah, go for it.
Maybe that's why Jordan Henderson wants to go there. He'd be the first English player, wouldn't he, in this influx of talent into the Saudi Pro League to be joining them. And it has proved one of the most controversial, hasn't it? Is yet to sign up at the time of recording, but certainly what a backlash he's felt.
Yeah, and the reason is his support of the LGBTQ community in Britain and elsewhere, and his promotion of social campaigns, which seem at odds with human rights and those causes and how they're dealt with in Saudi Arabia. And the sense is he's selling out the people who he claimed to represent and support. And there have been groups, Rob, Martyn, that have issued statements in relation to his possible move.
I mean, Steven Gerrard has gone as manager, and maybe he thinks if it's all right for one Liverpool legend, then perhaps he can do it himself. But it does leave a bad taste in the mouth, because it's just clearly it's all about money, and these footballers are incredibly highly paid anyway. Do they really need to sort of enrich themselves at the cost of their sort of personal reputations? I'm not sure it's the greatest idea.
Yeah, so we are talking about Al Ettifaq, the club he might be joining, and it's because he took such a stand. This is it. It's the wearing of the rainbow armbands in particular, and one of the issues is how Henderson spoke out in such a lengthy way about homophobia when he was sort of wearing the rainbow armbands 2 years ago. He talked about, I do believe when you see something that's clearly wrong and makes another human being feel excluded, you should stand shoulder to shoulder with them. You also have a responsibility to educate yourself better around the challenges they experience. Now, that's more than just wearing the armband. He's sort of set himself up on a sort of moral pedestal, hasn't he?
He has, and others have as well. And I was talking to an ex-Premier League player recently about this. Well, he was talking to me about this. He brought it up, the Henderson issue. And his view is it's not only about Jordan Henderson. This damages all sorts of players who will represent social justice campaigns or issues, because it creates a situation where people might not believe they actually mean what they're saying. In the words of the person I spoke to, he said this is part of, for some of them, about separating your brand from other brands, other players, because they're all small companies, if you think at that highest level, trying to get sponsorship and attention. And this is your your USP, your unique selling point to sponsors, that you're the social justice guy or the social justice woman, and that might attract sponsorship. And it's part of the, he said, some of them don't believe what they're saying. It's a brand exercise. Now, if we go down that cynical road, Jordan Henderson aside, if people stop believing anything that these guys are promoting or selling, that's quite a slippery slope, isn't it?
Yeah, and on Qatar, ahead of the World Cup there, he talked about human rights abuses being shocking, disappointing and horrendous. So it has created a sort of legitimacy of questioning him on Saudi Arabia. While Saudi Arabia will talk about the progress they made, increased women's rights and the like, there are still suppressions of freedoms.
I think it would be a shame if it actually goes ahead. I think that's a good point, actually, the thing about it sort of queering the pitch for other people who speak about social justice in the future, because say this now and then a few months later forget all that and head off and pick up the check.
It can look like expediency, can't it, in terms of the PR win at the time, and being suggested to sort of talk out on these issues, but then you set yourself up to have this morality stance down the line.
Absolutely.
Saudi Arabia does dominate our thoughts, and of course it's been dominating golf as well, still around the British Open, and still so many unresolved issues too as well.
Yeah, O'Neill's interesting, the South African former Open winner. He very, very scathing of Jay Monahan, the PGA Tour commissioner, effectively saying that he thinks he should resign. I think
he is on a health leave of absence at the moment, which was announced shortly after that controversial merger plan with PIF. Oh, right.
You could see
Welcome
why.
back.
You can see why I'd say that. The kind of legitimacy and credibility that he would have, having reverse ferreted so aggressively. The guy, you remember, we talked about this in a number of pods about how he invoked and used the 9/11 attack and said anyone who's been on the PGA has never had to apologize for their involvement with the PGA, alluding to the Saudi ownership of Live Golf. That was, pretty extreme. And then also just how aggressively he campaigned against it, and then suddenly appearing alongside Yasser Al Rumayyan, I think, in a CNBC interview when they announced the deal, to say what a great guy he is and we're ready to go. I mean, it's just such a reversal. It's hard to take anything he would say at face value. I mean, we just talked about potential Jordan Henderson's reversal, and here is another figure who has been obviously very attracted by the commercial terms on offer.
Well, that's our Saudi Live update for the week. Off to the United States, and the player who chose not to go to Saudi Arabia, despite the fact he is the ambassador for Saudi tourism, Visit Saudi, Lionel Messi, who's created quite a bit of attention actually landing in the US, because MLS doesn't really get that much global focus, I would say, a lot of the time.
Yeah, it was interesting to see a comment from one American football journalist that normally at Inter Miami's training they get just one or two journalists, or sometimes none at all. And I think there was something like 200 there, and helicopters flying overhead, and it really was an amazing spectacle, really. But you'd imagine that, most famous player in the world at the moment, World Cup winner, it's probably for David Beckham, and the others at Inter Miami doesn't get any better than that.
Almost as big as Ryan Reynolds arriving at Wrexham, eh? The other thing I noticed with Inter Miami is the band coming back together. Tata Martino, the Argentine coach from Rosario, Newell's Old Boys, who coached Messi in Barcelona, he's joined up. We've got Sergio Busquets and Jordi Alba, who all left Barcelona in the last few months, joining up. I mean, Messi aside, great for MLS that you've got this guy there. This idea that it's taking it to a new level, I'm not. There's still that retirement home feel for me. I'm sorry to say if it offends people, but yes, you've got Lionel Messi's there, but you've got these two guys with him who are collectively 70 plus, and his coach. It doesn't feel maybe serious in a football sense.
And that lesser pressure was felt by Gareth Bale, who of course won the MLS Cup last season with LAFC. But he spoke recently on BT Sport to Jermaine Genius and Peter Crouch about how he didn't quite feel the same pressure as, say, at Real Madrid.
It's a lot more chilled. Like, if you lose at Madrid, it's like the world's ended. You crucified, you feel down, you go home, you're not happy. As where they kind of accept losing a bit more, and I think there's no consequence to, you can't get relegated, you can't, you just lose a game, you go to the next one. They kind of accept losing a lot better over there.
Gareth Bale there on BT Sport, reflecting the realities of life in a league without the pressures of promotion and relegation.
Bit more about celebrity than it is about football, perhaps.
That's why it's not as popular as other leagues. But there was another thing which came out of this whole thing around about Apple TV, which was quite interesting. First of all, there was a bit of a row with Wayne Rooney at the All-Stars game, unhappy about Apple TV moving some of the coaching staff out of their seats, and he sort of made a sort of fairly public complaint about that, which is obviously, given that Apple TV have got a huge deal with the MLS globally, that can't have gone down too well with them. But the other thing is Eddie Q, who's Apple's senior vice president, when he was speaking to some of the media in Washington DC, he basically ruled out Apple bidding for the Premier League rights, certainly for the domestic rights, which, given that they're off the table, Viaplay or Nent, as we know, they're pulling out of their UK broadcast deals with Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland for the internationals. Actually, the numbers of people who might bid for the Premier League domestic rights next time are sort of dwindling slightly. So that in terms of trying to drive up the price, that might be a bit of an issue.
For those not following it, Viaplay, who funds them? Their stronghold is in Scandinavia. They had expanded, hadn't they? And they're more than just sport. They're a sort of entertainment streaming service too.
Yeah, they are the Premier League's second biggest international partners. Nent, I think, a $2 billion 6-year deal for Scandinavia and the Baltics. But they are, they're sort of drawing in, making a lot of redundancies, cutting costs because they're struggling to make it work financially.
Well, just one word for you: DAZN. We've talked about them. $5 billion in the hole, another streaming service. Now you've got Nent. Does anyone think any of this will ever work? I mean, the amount of money that has gone down the drain. For me, the idea that Nent was going to have a presence that was going to be commercially successful in as competitive market as Britain, just bonkers. It just seems like people want to burn cash.
And quite a mark they'd made in Scotland. They were the naming rights sponsor of the Scottish League Cup. Also picked up the UEFA national team rights as well. So they showed Scotland's win over Spain, for instance, on Viaplay. So, certainly made their presence felt in Scotland. So obviously questions now in Scotland about the broadcast contracts that they do have. They also have deals in place with Sky and the BBC.
Yeah, I think they'll be looking for people to take those on, those deals. And yeah, certainly for people who want to watch those European internationals in Scotland and other parts of the UK, that's a big issue, isn't it? I think you're right though, Rob, Tariq. I mean, the about the streaming thing and making it work it's not easy, because I think there are a large group of people who still like to sign up to whatever, something traditional. Well, we say it's traditional. It's traditional now, isn't it? Sky or BT or TNT Sports, as it's now become. And streaming it's still a difficult sell, I think.
Technology changing all the time. Channels also changing too. BT Sports' name has gone from the UK this week. They formed a new joint venture with Warner Brothers Discovery, which means the TNT Sports brand, known in other parts of the world like South America, has now entered the UK. And part of that same umbrella of channels is Eurosport and the Discovery Plus service, who have the rights to the Olympics, and we're approaching a year until Paris 2024. And this week we've been hearing from the IC president, Thomas Bach.
He did a media round table, which is the first time he's done one for a long time, but only focused on Paris. But I think one of the key issues is the still Russian Ukrainian athletes, will they be able to take part? And the IOC have blocked London from hosting the Olympic qualifying series for the new sports next year, just because of the government's hardline stance on not allowing any Russian athletes who have state funding, because that basically rules out all the sort of smaller sports, while saying rich tennis players can still come.
And on tennis, actually, the reception received by the Russian and Belarusian players was pretty warm at Wimbledon. They also didn't abuse their platform. It wasn't exploited by the Kremlin for PR purposes, as had been feared. There were no major disputes with the Ukrainian players either that we know of. So I wonder how much that actually feeds into how we analyse the situation regarding entry for Russian and Belarusian players and athletes at the Olympics, although it is more of a sense of a team environment there. I think there's a lot more focus on the nationality than there is at a tennis tournament.
Yeah, it's a massive flag waving contest, isn't it, the Olympics? Because you think about a bunch of minor sports that you don't pay attention to, and you're suddenly paying attention to them because they're running around in national colours, and there's medals tables, and there's pride and all of these things. I think a couple of the tennis players actually spoke out against the war, whether at Wimbledon or elsewhere, to say obviously they don't support, Russia's military ambitions and what they're doing in Ukraine, and well done to them for doing that. But yeah, the Olympics is a completely different kettle of fish. It is nation versus nation, and don't forget Russia, which has been banned from previous Olympics, has been highly visible at those Olympics when it's been banned. We're talking about Tokyo and Beijing, and other world championships. This is before the war.
It's a conundrum. Thomas Bach said he thinks it's unlikely they're going to make a final decision before next year. I mean, makes sense because we need to see what happens actually in Ukraine itself. Obviously, there's little sign of things changing in the conflict as we speak. But yeah, the British government, they put out some guidelines for national governing bodies. They're also saying that actually they think any British athlete shouldn't compete in international competition against any Russian who has spoken out in favour of the war. That's putting another sort of stick into the spokes. But they do say they don't expect them to sort of put their positions at the Olympics at risk themselves by doing so. So there's so much going on in this area, and I think it's going to be something to keep on a watch on for the next 6 months.
Yeah, I think the British government is among the most hawkish. Really, there is 2 or 3 dozen governments that have presented, I guess, joint statements in the last year or so when it comes to Russia, but I'm not sure whether that will hold, whether everyone is as strict as Britain when it comes to Russia. And I think as the games near, that might start to fray a little. That'd be worth keeping an eye on as well, whether that collective position is as strong as it was maybe a year or 2 ago.
Really a reflection of the wider geopolitical discussions going on at the moment. Sport playing out one of those strands about how committed the West in particular is to maintaining positions against Russia on Ukraine, how united they are, how committed they are to things like funding, resources, and the like too. So really, sport can be a manifestation of some of those debates. Now, as we close up, we did tease at the start, so we should mention it again. Thomas Bach talking about climate change and the impact on Summer Olympics.
Yeah, he referenced the Future Host Commission, which is a body set up to look at future hosts, obviously, and the fact that climate change is something that's looking at it in sort of fairly significant detail, as Tariq referred to. There was initially the kind of fears over the Winter Olympics and the fact that some of the hosts were struggling to have the cold enough conditions, but increasingly, summer hosts too. And look what happened in Tokyo. They had to move the marathon like hundreds of miles north and the race walking events to Sapporo because it was just too hot in Tokyo for those endurance events. And those sort of things, I think, are going to happen more and more.
Our bit for sustainability, recording this podcast all remotely. Although, Tariq, you're still out in Australia, keeping an eye on things there at the Women's World Cup.
Yeah, good to be with you guys, and I'm doing a lot of walking, so doing my bit as well. I'm avoiding taxis to do my little bit. More to do with my weight than anything else, but it all counts.
No fee for priority vehicles for you. But thank you, everyone, for listening as ever. You can message us on Threads if you want, at Sport Unlocked Now. Also Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And particularly if you hit subscribe, it means we land in your feeds automatically. And such is the way of Twitter. If you put notifications on our tweet, it also then sends up into your feed automatically onto your home screens when we've actually got a new pod after our brief break. But as ever, thank you for listening and goodbye.